Welcome to Cwic Show. I am your host, Greg Mattson. In this episode, we are going to be covering K-12 and critical race theory, or anti-racism. Everything that goes along with critical social justice and how it has implemented itself into our lower education, if you will, our K-12 education. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this. I'm going to cover mostly the last 6 or 7 months and some of the things that have happened. You probably know mostly about these things, but I'm going to show you kind of piece by piece, kind of where we are, and maybe pull back the veil a little bit to understand just how pervasive critical race theory is in the K-12 schools. And by the way, it's so interesting because there will be those that want to push CRT and they'll be blatant about it. But, you know, that's kind of a sacred cow for us, right? Is lower education, the K through 12. It's like we're all careful about what our kids are hearing, what they're learning, and those that want to implement this, who are at the highest levels of administration in schools and the Department of Education, they and the unions, right? They know this now. They've kind of been able to go at this and do it behind closed doors. But this has been one of the blessings of COVID, because Zoom has opened up so many things. You've seen the school board reactions, right? Where you've got school board meetings and parents just going crazy about what is going on and where is this coming from. Well, a lot of that is not just a new implementation of critical race theory into K-12, although that's some of it. But a lot of it is actually pulling back the curtain and seeing what's really behind it through Zoom. And so as parents have been now able to be more involved in the classroom, so to speak, the digital classroom, they're listening to the words and to the phrases and things that are being said. It's like, whoa, wait a minute here. I had no idea as a parent that this was going on in K through 12. So this has been kind of a little blessing of the COVID era, if you will. One of the key moments of this was the recent gubernatorial race in Virginia, where you had Terry McAuliffe, who's kind of a Clintonite, and he's running for government and for governor. He's running against a Republican named Glenn Youngkin. And this probably turns the tide, right? Because what happens with Terry McAuliffe? Well, he said publicly that he didn't, and I quote, think parents should be telling schools what they should teach. Now think about that for a moment. It's not that parents are all trained to be teachers. They're not saying they should be in the classrooms teaching. But you have a battle that is developing between the institutions of the United States and individuals and parents and families. And these are institutions that are being taken over by the religion of academia, critical social justice. These are institutions that are run mostly by elites of higher education and of urbanites that think that everybody has their same values across the United States. I mean, if I've been through my schooling at XYZ University, and this is what I was taught, well, wow, everybody must think this, and this is what I'm supposed to teach the kids. So Terry McAuliffe loses probably because of this, which is a great sign. And it's not that I'm being party specific here. I don't care personally on that. But what I do care about is critical race theory and its permeating our institutions especially. I mean, I don't know if there's anything more sacred than the kids and getting into the K-12 system, which they've done. And they've done it at a very high level, probably much worse than what you know. And so what I wanted to do is kind of go through this as again, because I haven't covered this for in a little while, and kind of lay down some groundwork, because there's some other work that I'm going to be doing and research that I've got that is going to be going over several things that are happening in the K-12 space that you need to be aware of. There's two things I think that are important about education and understanding education, and why there is such a conflict with things like critical race theory and anti-racism and the Black Lives Matter movement, which is going to be in full regalia here in February, likely. And some of it's great. Some of it's great. I'm not saying it's not. Some of it for me is probably just fine. But a lot of it isn't. And again, if you understand critical social justice, if you understand critical race theory, if you understand intersectionality, what is really happening is that in those areas there, and I'm going to talk specifically about race, race is the Trojan horse. It has nothing to do in the end with race. It has to do what's inside the Trojan horse. What's inside the Trojan horse is leftism, Marxist-rooted leftism. That is what critical race theory is. That is what anti-racism is. And you can't get around that. And when you have the values that come along with that type of a radical political system, it's going to butt heads with parents, especially. It's going to butt heads at work. But when you're dealing with people's kids, there's going to be some problems there. Fortunately, there's issues in the government, there's issues in the media, obviously, and every other institution in the country. But K-12 obviously is a place that we need to really focus on. And education it's not a matter of parents being able to know how to teach. That's not the point. They don't need to be educated to learn how to teach, to say that they can decide what their kids are going to be taught. That is everything. The education is not just facts. In fact, it's secondarily facts. It's secondarily the ability to teach. It is primarily about values. It is primarily the narrative. It is primarily the story. It is being able to teach processes. It's being able to teach how to think. And when you have a radical organization like the unions now, which I would put them, never would have put them in that camp, even though I didn't agree with them before. But when you have now these radical organizations, and they are radical, that have been completely sold this bill of goods of critical social justice, and they have now invaded the K-12 space. Well, you're going to be teaching values and forcing values upon families and kids that they don't even understand to start off with, right? The kids don't understand these types of values. They haven't been given that worldview. Very few kids have parents that are radicals, that have a radical point of view, that want to get rid of democracy, that want to help everybody become an activist. That's critical race theory. That's anti-racism. And you choose what is going to be taught based on your values. And the second part of that I think is crucial is the ability for the states and the districts to choose their own curriculum. Because everybody's different. You have different demographics across the country. The last thing in the world we want is for these things to become centralized. I mean, look at the more we have become centralized in our education system in the United States since the late 70s when the Department of Education was put in under President Carter. All we've done is tanked in our education. It's there's a good reason to have school districts and states that govern their own curriculum and listen to their own parents on the ground as to what needs to be taught. But this fight between the institution of education and the parents is just starting. And once that is seated, to me, it's over. It's done. Because you will have indoctrinated and activated kids in every part of the country. And you say, well, Greg, that sounds, like hyperbole. It's not. I have read these things. Again, I have read thousands of pages of state curriculum. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I've read their ethnic studies programs. I have read their policies and procedures for equitable outcomes. This is not just about helping those on the fringes. That's not what it is. It's leftism. It's cultural Marxism. It's intersectionality. And what is really wanted there, the holy grail for the labor unions and for those that are pushing critical social justice in the K-12 space, is that they do centralize everything. And then they run it and control it. And then it's forced out to everybody. They want a top-down, completely top-down process for curriculum. And it's not just curriculum, right? The curriculum is about activating students. You'll find that everywhere in these state curriculums. How do they make change? That is what education is becoming. It's how do we educate these individuals into anti-racism, into critical social justice. Find me anywhere in the country an ethnic studies program that leans to the right, just leans a little to the right, or that is moderate. Of course, you're not going to find it because, again, the chassis that carries race and any other intersectional attribute or identity is leftism. That's what's inside the Trojan horse. So, going back to October here, 2021, remember we have the NSBA letter. That is the National School Boards Association. And they send the letter out to the Department of Justice. It appears, because if you look at the language, it's very interesting, but it appears that the Secretary of Education actually solicited this letter from the NSBA. Now, they deny that he solicited this. I'm trying to think of his name. I think it's Secretary, I want to say Cordova. I'm not 100% sure on that. But they deny it, but then at the same time, they leave it completely open by talking about how much he communicates with everyone and talks with everyone. And that's part of the response about whether or not he solicited the letter. It's very nebulous in keeping it very open as to saying, okay, we didn't solicit the letter, but we do talk to everybody, and maybe we talked about a letter. Maybe we talked about what maybe some things that should be done here with the parents that are all complaining about critical race theory. And it's just so odd, right, that you would have, okay, if the parents at a school board in one district somewhere in the United States are complaining about the curriculum, well, what do? You have introspection and you say, oh, okay, well, maybe we need to change the curriculum. And of course, in most cases, now Utah might change here, but in most cases, you're able to say, okay, well, we're going to have our local school board here is going to be chosen by the people. They get to choose who these individuals are, or those that are on the state school board are able to be voted in by the constituents of that state. That's another issue we're gonna cover here shortly. And that way you cede power to the parents. But when they don't know what's going on pre-COVID, then you don't even know what to do. You don't even know that that the problem is even as big as it is. So they send a letter, and what does the letter say? It asks the Department of Justice to deem parents that are causing problems at school board meetings. And it's very nebulous. In fact, it's very, it's not, you go back and you see some of the press coverage from like Secretary Psaki, right, of the Biden administration about this. And she talks about, well, there's threats of violence and other things that are going on. And maybe there are a few of those. But that's not what the letter says to the Department of Justice. It basically gives zero examples of anything happening like that. Nothing. And talks more about the parents who are outraged about what is being taught at the school boards, as if they're the enemies of the schools. In many ways, they are. And this letter it's just got holes all over it, right? It lies, it has falsehoods in it, and you have to start thinking to yourself, why would they write this? Why are they writing this to the Department of Justice? It's called control. It's called power. It's called, how do we push the parents out of the scenario? We want control of the kids. We want control of the curriculum. It's very, very odd. And I don't know how you read the tea leaves any different on this. The letter says, and I quote, critical race theory is not taught in public schools. That is a flat out lie, an absolute lie. Not only is it taught and its tenets taught and actual manifestations of activism in critical race theory that are brought about in K-12 schools, but the words are actually used, critical race theory, in many of these states' curriculum. And we're going to get to that here in just a bit. For example, the National Teachers Union has called for the implementation of critical race theory in all 50 states. Now, one thing you may not know, and we should use this because this letter talking about how critical race theory has not been taught. I will say, I want to let you know that the NSBA did write a letter of apology saying that they didn't use, that the words they used and everybody that they were encompassing in as being a threat was wrong. Because that's basically what they were saying, that the parents are all a threat to the school. That's how they felt. That was their first reaction to this. They did write a letter of apology, so I'll give them that. But to give us more context, we need to go back to July of 2021 and the motions that were adopted by the National Education Association, right? This is the largest labor union in the country. Not just the largest teachers union. This is the largest labor union in the country. I want to show you a little bit of what was adopted at that time in July of last year. You can take a look here at new business item number 2, adopted as amended. And here is what it says. This is, the NEA will research the organizations attacking educators doing anti-racist work and or use the research already done and put together a list of resources. This is strategy to battle anyone who doesn't agree with what they say. And putting together a list of resources and recommendations for state affiliates, locals, and individual educators to utilize when they are attacked, right? Or criticized is really what they're saying. Or there are board member meetings, school board meetings where parents are upset about this being taught. This is what it is. These are the strategies that are putting together. You think that writing letters to the Department of Justice might have been a part of this? How they're going to fight this off? They have a complete strategy already laid out, right? To fight against the critics of critical race theory, against the critics of leftism being taught to your children. Now, here's the rationale or background for that we're doing this. The attacks on anti-racist teachers are increasing. What does that mean? Is this violence? No, it's not violence. It is, why are you teaching this? And to them, this is everything. This is their religion. So of course they're going to push it. And they're going to see anything that is critical of that as an attack on them. The attacks on anti-racist teachers are increasing, coordinated by well-funded organizations such as the Heritage Foundation, which the Heritage Foundation does do that. We need to be better prepared to respond to these attacks so that our members can continue this important work. Okay, in other words, they have a massive agenda already laid out and in place, right? So that they can continue this important work. It's like saying, so that we can continue the missionary effort, the missionary fund, the missionary movement, right? So that our missionary program can stay going. It's the same thing. It is a religious fervor. And the foundation of this is already laid in the K-12 programs. Now, you're going to see here also in this point here that's highlighted, the result in, this is also part of the adoption of these motions, result in increasing the implementation of culturally responsive education, critical race theory, and ethnic, being Native American, Asian, Black, Latino, Middle Eastern, North African, and Pacific Islander studies curriculum in pre-K-12 and higher education. If you take every one of those words there, ethnic studies, right, or going into any of the other areas of focus, you're not talking about the education of those cultures. That's not what it is, right? They have completely appropriated ethnicities and race and cultures and used them as the Trojan horse, right? In underlying every single one of these is critical social justice. And then lastly here, what is adopted is new business item 39. The NEA, the largest labor union in the country, with guidance on implementation from the NEA president and chairs of the Ethnic Minority Affairs Caucuses. This is not talking about their cultures. It's not that they don't talk about the cultures. It's not that they don't talk about other ethnicities. It's the chassis that is running this thing though, right? A, share and publicize through existing channels information already available on critical race theory, parentheses CRT, what it is and what it is not. Have a team of staffers for members who want to learn more and fight back against anti-CRT rhetoric. Why do they have this agenda in place? Why do they care? This is a political bias. It's a political agenda. It's a political ideology. They're fully engaged in the religion of academia. They're fully engaged in this ideology. It's not about teaching your kids, not the way you and I think about kids being taught. It's about critical pedagogy, activating them, helping them to think in a different critical, and that's with a capital C, manner, activating them as anti-racists, which is nothing more or less than radical activism. Then we get a few more things here. They're all part of critical social justice. And see if you can see the agenda, the political agenda behind this, right? B, provide an already created in-depth study that critiques empire. Okay. White supremacy, anti-blackness, anti-indigeneity. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Racism, patriarchy, cis heteropatriarchy. We start getting into crazy land here, right? With our intersectionality, capitalism, right? I can't tell you how many people comment back to me. Educated, highly educated people, maybe that's their liability, honestly, and tell me that none of this has anything to do with Marxism or anti-capitalism movements. These people, some of them, many of them, don't know. They have not really studied this. It has been an incredible job that the crits, as you might call them, from critical race theory have done in putting out forward to the masses how this is all about race and helping race relations and those that are marginalized. Of course, there's no love in this whatsoever. There really isn't when you really look at it. It's all about force. And yet, at the same time, stepping back to those that are more converted to the religion, really digging deep into studying critical race theory and anti-racism and post-colonialism, gender studies, all of the critical theories and their subdivisions, sub-disciplines that you get in universities. And there's right there, right? Capitalism. This is a major part of it. Ibram Kendi, the biggest anti-racist figure out there, and I would say the biggest critical race theorist out there. He criticizes capitalism everywhere. He criticizes liberal democracy everywhere. But no, this isn't about that. This isn't about Marxist roots, right? It's right there. It's right there. These things are not hard to find. But you have the media and many, many others just running cover for all of this, either ignorantly or not ignorantly. Continues with ableism, anthropocentrism, and other forms of power and oppression this is, of course, they're going to use this word, the intersections of our society, and that we oppose attempts to ban critical race theory and or the 1619 Project. I'm doing an episode on that here very shortly. So, in other words, we have our agenda, parents, and we're going to shove it down your kids' throats, whether you like it or not. And if you criticize us for this, you don't like it, well, we're going to come up with strategies here that are going to fight this off. Maybe there are legal strategies. Maybe we can go to force with the executive department or the executive branch and get to the Department of Justice and talk more about this, right? And begin to label parents as domestic terrorists. This is not hard to see what is happening. There's nothing. Just by their fruits you shall know them. This is not tough. This can be very clear if you just look at it a little bit. Now, talking about history here, they go into this a little bit and making sure that we learn about slavery and discrimination of indigenous, black, brown, and other peoples of color. I'm totally fine with all of that. But again, it depends on how the narrative is built on this. It depends on how the values are placed there. But get the last line here. See what it says. It says the association being the NEA, will further convey that in teaching these topics, it is reasonable and appropriate for curriculum to be informed by academic frameworks. What are they really talking about here? Academic frameworks. They're talking about the religion of academia, and they're talking about pedagogy. By academic frameworks for understanding and interpreting the impact of the past on current society, including critical race theory. But the letter by the NSBA in October to the Department of Justice, no, critical race theory is not being taught in K-12 schools. It's an absolute joke. It is look at my left hand and not my right. It's a shell game. And then D, some more political trenches that have been dug already. Join with Black Lives Matter at school. Okay, Black Lives Matter at school is part of the NEA, and its goal is essentially to create every school as an we're talking about 14,000 schools under the NEA. It's to create every school as an anti-racist school. That does not mean fighting racism. You got to get that out of your head. They're very smart on their words, right? It means a leftist school. It means activating your kids. That's what it is. And the Zinn Education Project, that is Howard Zinn. I'll get into that in just a second. To call for a rally this year on October 14th, George Floyd's birthday, as a national day of action. So this is in your schools with your kids, to teach lessons about structural racism and oppression. That's critical race theory, systemic racism. It's exactly what they're talking about. E, conduct a virtual listening tour that will educate members on the tools and resources needed to defend honesty in education, including but not limited to tools like CRT. F, commit President Becky Pringle to make public statements across all lines of media that support racial honesty in education, including but not limited to critical race theory. So there you have it, right? The letter full of lies after lies after lies from the NSBA in October to the Department of Justice, calling for, here these parents are desperate to help their kids, not, being pulled away. This is people of color. This is white people. This is everybody. There's no specific group of individuals that are doing this, right? It's people that don't want their kids taught racism, because that's what critical race theory is, or don't want a radical agenda taught to their 7-year-old. So the NSBA writes this up, goes to the Department of Justice looking somehow for force against these parents who are against the political entrenchment of our K-12 schools nationwide. And so they lie. They flat out lie about critical race theory. And then lastly, going to the DOJ isn't enough, right? Having a curriculum and administration that is dedicated to a political agenda isn't enough. They want to shut down all voices everywhere. So the NEA, just this month in January 2022, put out a letter to all of the social media companies. Here's just a small excerpt from this. They say, take, for example, the alarming growth of a small but violent group of radicalized adults. Yeah, you mean the parents concerned about their kids' education? Who falsely believe that graduate level courses, CRT, about racism are being taught in K-12 public schools because of misinformation spread on social media. You just read the NEA's own adopted motions, right? This is not. It's absolute insanity. It's absolute insanity what they are trying to do, and they're coming this close to completely taking the reins of things. Now, one of the things we talked about here and that the NEA talked about is really focusing in on the Zinn education project, right? So if I quickly go over there and show you what this is all about, you can see what comes up immediately, right? Economic justice, reparations now. So this is the labor union. This is the K-12 labor union. And this is what they are focused on. Repair. Students design a reparations bill. Coming down a little bit further, another political issue, voting, right? What our students should know about the struggle for the ballot, but won't learn from their textbooks. Let's circumvent everything that is not teaching what we want to teach. From voter ID laws to voter roll purges, gerrymandering to poll closures to the deadly in-person voting. This is all political. It's all political. It's not about math. It's not about history, barely about history, right? It's not about anything except for radical policies, radical indoctrination. And Howard Zinn himself said that he was a Marxist. He said several different things. At one point, he said, I'm a Marxist. At another point, he said, I'm a socialist. At one point, he said, I'm a democratic socialist. But he pretty much aligned with the hard socialist doctrines and politics. And that's who the NEA is supporting. That's where they're getting some of their information and their curriculum on how to teach students. And you see here for the NEA, sections on their website, which is advocating for change. And of course, this is something that can be just focused on the teachers here at this point, I suppose, and people that are a member of this labor union, right? But you can see what they're really talking about here. We need to dismantle unjust systems. It's systemic racism. That's critical race theory. We'll dismantle unjust systems. NEA Ed Justice, or Education Justice, that's a new type of justice. Education Justice engages and mobilizes educators, allies, and activists in the fight for racial, social, and economic justice in public education. And of course, that includes getting rid of capitalism. Anyway, I just wanted to lay the groundwork on this as we move forward a little bit. We're going to be talking about what's happening in Utah here shortly. I want to go back into California a little bit and a couple of other states as this heats up, because it's going to heat up. And this fight between the parents and the institution, a politicized institution that has dug trenches, very deep trenches. Anyway, I wanted to lay the groundwork here for covering more of the K-12 happenings across the country, because things are heating up, and they're coming from surprising places. And you know, I know you don't have time to go through thousands of pages of state curriculum and see what is being put into place and what is happening at the administrative level and at the labor union level. You know, this is a fight. This is a fight. And we're losing very quickly. I mean, within 5 years, the last 5 years even, we're losing very quickly. Now, this has been going on for decades. I can tell you stories, you just can't imagine some of the stories I have from my school district from the 70s and 80s. Unbelievable. These were the people that were running my school district back then. But stay tuned for additional information on the K-12 space. Thanks for listening.